Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Marc Johnston and Heather Choate.
Good morning or good afternoon, wherever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. We're excited and grateful that you chose to join us today. I'm Heather Choate, and I'm here with Marc Johnston. How are you doing, Marc?
I'm doing great. And how about yourself, Heather?
Doing very well. All right, so today we have another topic that you guys asked for over in our Thriving Marriage Facebook group, which is on having hard conversations. Marc, want to give them a little teaser about what we're going to cover today?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about why we are going to have why certain conversations are difficult, the kind of dynamic that creates this sort of situation, and just a little bit of advice on how to get out of that pattern of not being able to have these difficult conversations.
Okay. And I know this is a big question on a lot of people's minds. How do I have a hard conversation about, maybe their affair or why they want out, why we can't seem to communicate, why they're giving me the silent treatment, right? Hard conversations about the kids, hard conversations about how do we go forward with this situation, right? So this is going to be really, really valuable. Before we get to that, though, we're going to do our client win of the week. This one comes from permission from Jude. And Jude says, biggest win yet. After 2 months and was doing everything wrong until I started the program and changed my whole outlook and stubborn ways. Was heartbreaking to hear she was moving into her own townhouse last week, but it simply turned to missing me and reached out. We talked here and there, but yesterday she called me out of the blue and we had a great talk. Even better today and tonight she dropped more hints than a little that she wants to get back together. And so obviously Jude had to go through some really hard conversations with his wife and talking about how they were able to have a great talk after he's learned some of the principles that we teach here with our PATH program and our coaching. So it's awesome. And let's dive right in now. So good job, Jude. So Marc, where do we want to start as far as guiding?
So I want to give people the context of why this is an important topic of having difficult conversations. One of the things that I've seen over and over again, I would say the one unifying factor that every single one of the failed relationships that we do see, what they have, is like an inability or unwillingness to have these difficult conversations, to be able to provide or listen to feedback. I do think that there's some reasons why these conversations are really difficult. I think over years, couples tend to get into their own ruts or patterns. And so you stop having these conversations perhaps because you received poor reactions from your spouse. Maybe you've had these conversations and you just felt attacked, or maybe you've been the one trying to have these conversations and your husband or wife doesn't listen to you, or doesn't follow through, doesn't actually do anything with what you said. Perhaps you get to a point where there's very little hope that any amount of feedback would be effective, or that it's valued or acted on or is going to be heard. Other times it's not even your own relationship that causes these problems. It might be some sort of past trauma or other kind of triggers that are really pushing people away from having these difficult conversations. Now, the end result here is that given enough time, the couple gets it to this point where they basically no longer wish to try having these hard conversations. Either that, or we get stuck into what's called the this pursuer avoider or pursuer chaser sort of pattern, and it's really, really bad if you get stuck in a specific role in those patterns. That's roughly what we're talking about here. Now, one of the big things that I would see over and over again. And this was actually backed by quite a bit of research. This pattern where there is a pursuer, avoider, and people get stuck in those roles, it puts couples at a high risk of divorce. This is according to studies of like thousands of couples. Now, the reason why I'm talking about this is, and how this has to do with having difficult conversations is, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest reasons why these conversations aren't happening, is because either you yourself are in that pursuer role and you're chasing after things and putting a lot of pressure and you want to get things done, and or you become the avoider and you back off and you put up the stone wall and you stop having those conversations. And these, like, when you get into these this kind of pattern, it's when conversations really stop. I don't know, Heather, have you seen things like this yourself? Like, do you know, you've heard of this, right? I mean, this is not an uncommon idea that I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, and a lot of our audience, if you've been following us for a while, you may have heard like push versus pull. It's kind of going into a little bit of the same principles there. But even having seen it not only in, probably dozens of couples that we've coached, we've coached thousands by now. And so thousands and thousands of students, which is awesome. But we see this pattern a lot. And in fact, I've seen it in my own relationship. So it definitely, these roles we kind of fall into where one person's pursuing after them and the other one's avoiding. I mean, raise your hand if you feel like, yeah, I can relate to that. So in my marriage, I tend to take the pursuer role, which is maybe against the stereotype, right, of the man pursuing the woman, right? But he tends to emotionally withdraw, and then I tend to try to pursue after him to make him open up and to resolve whatever issues are underlying. So I've definitely seen
you're saying that's against the norm, but it's not necessarily.
Right.
It looks different with men and women in that role, but I would say that it's not any more common in women or men. It just looks different. What you tend to hear, when this gets into a negative space, like a pursuing woman tends to be nagging, and they tend to, there's a lot of blame and crit. Like that's the label that's often applied to women. For men, it might be like they're uncaring or rude, they're controlling or manipulative. Those tend to be the labels for the pursuing men. It's very much similar things, though. So what this is about, though, and I want to talk about each role here. So you're talking about the pursuer role. Why is it, why is it important to pursue? What's going on there?
Yeah. So when you're saying it in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way? Let me make sure.
Either way. Well, I mean, you can explain your own. Maybe I'd like to hear your own circumstances. Why do you tend to pursue in your marriage?
Right. So I'm someone that I want to resolve things quickly. I want to address them in the moment. And when he pulls away, that makes me very anxious and makes me feel very insecure. So then I try to chase after him to get him to open up so that I don't have that sense of insecurity anymore. In a nutshell, that's the basic.
And what you're describing there is basically like the textbook, like what a when they label someone as the pursuer, this is exactly what's going on. The pursuer tends to respond to stress by drawing closer to their partner. They focus on fixing what they think is wrong, and they become anxious about some distance. If it gets to unhealthy levels, then there's a tendency for attacking, blaming, criticizing, especially when the partner is emotionally unavailable.
Yep.
Now, what's interesting here with Heather and I actually tend to go in the other direction, and I tend to be the one that kind of steps away and likes a little bit more distance. If I would say that I fall into any role, it would be more the avoider role. For me, it feels easier to step away and get away from that stress and to not have to deal with it. I recognize that there are times when that's not a healthy way to approach it. But the stereotypical avoider responds to stress by moving away from others. They tend to retreat into other activities as a distraction. If it gets to unhealthy levels, then the avoider tends to have difficulty with vulnerability or openness, tends to have worries about what others perceive about them, or just in general do not have good, healthy responses to stress. The flip side of that is that the avoider tends to be a bit more approachable, a bit easier to have those conversations when there is less pressure, when they're not feeling chased. Oftentimes the labels applied to people who are avoiding, it tends that people talk about them being shut down, having walls. In other circumstances, they might be described as withholding whatever love or withholding something here. And it, or just like we were talking about with the pursuer, the avoider tends to be described as emotionally unavailable, and that's the problem. That a lot of when you get into this dynamic, what happens there? Now, here's the thing. Now, like I said, I have more tendencies towards avoidance, and Heather, you're talking about you have more tendencies towards pursuing, but that doesn't mean that this is always our respective roles. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't, obviously I'm not there in your home or whatnot, but are there times when you avoid problems? I know there's times when I'm certainly pursuing problems, and my wife and I switch those roles.
Yeah, not as often.
Okay. Well,
there are some, but I think that with our different personality types, we just can't, and a lot of couples I think can relate to this. We continue to fall into the same pattern, but now we've learned how to take it from kind of an unhealthy pattern to more of a healthy pattern that does support the different ways that we do process things very, very differently. And so having understanding and empathy and respect for the way that he processes things and vice versa helps us to work together so it can become a healthier pattern. I mean, sometimes procrastination kind of comes in, but when it comes to relationships, I tend to just really stick really firmly in that role, but there probably is some variation too.
We have some comments here.
Yeah.
Heather, people are asking, okay, well, it's all well and good to explain that these patterns exist, but I see one, how do we actually get someone to be emotionally available? Yeah, right there. It's there. I have to point. Like when it's recording, like it's like the opposite of my movements, and so I'm having right there. That comment.
If you're listening to audio, you have no idea what we're talking about. But if you're watching live or the video, we just put.
I am pointing at a comment on the screen there for all of you that are just listening. So, Heather, you've talked about how you and Ben have gotten to a healthy place, and you're saying you very much are in that pursuer role. How did you get to a healthy place in that role?
Oh man. Yeah. So that definitely was through a lot of pain at first, realizing what we were doing wasn't working. So it was really getting inside his head and understanding the way he saw it, because I built up a story, as you guys all know, in our path process, we always talk about the story, that when he emotionally withdrew and avoided talking to me about the big problem, say we just had a big fight, and then he would not talk to me about it for days. Right. And I'm like, well, then you must not care. You must not care, because if you cared enough, if you loved me as much as I love you, then you would work through this and we wouldn't just sweep it under the rug and pretend like everything's okay. And so I built up a story that then prevented us from connecting deeper, that Ben doesn't care. He doesn't love me as much as I love him. So how can I continue in this relationship? Right. So that all changed when I learned how to let that story go and actually see what was going on inside his head. And for him, what I've learned is that he really does not want to do or say the wrong thing because he doesn't want to cause further damage. And he needs time to process through emotionally what's happening so that then he can come with the best response that he from his better self, right? Not in his emotional reactive kind of state. And so knowing that he's actually doing it from a place of caring about me and caring about a relationship is why he withdraws, why he takes some time to work it out internally before we talk about it, helps me realize that story that he doesn't care is actually completely false. He's just doing it in his own way. So getting where he was coming from and seeing that it isn't that he doesn't care, it's that he just processes emotions and events very differently from me, and learning how to respect that, learning how to give him some time, but not have it be days and days and days, because that doesn't work for me, right? It can't be all about the way he does it. It has to be kind of this middle ground. So now we have there's some kind of hurt or criticism that needs to be said because something really didn't work in our relationship for either one of us, then we have a process where I say, hey, Ben, I really need to talk to you about something. When in the next 24 hours would be a good time for you? And that way I give him time and space to set the stage. We talk about this in other past podcasts, right? About setting the stage for having these hard conversations. That way we both show up, we're as calm as we both can be, and we're seeking to understand the other person. And so going through that is a way that we've been able to resolve this pursuer-avoider relationship and be able to have really hard conversations in a really positive, healing manner that pulls us together rather than pushes us further apart.
So I'm going to read word for word the talking point that I had at this point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, of course, we run this live, and of course we have talking points. So the talking point here says for how to get around this pursuer role says less pressure, less judgment, less anger, more empathy, more collaboration. And I mean, the reason why I read it word for word, Heather, is essentially what you were describing there is exactly what was going on. I'm going to pick that apart just a little bit. So one, I want to make a point that either role is not necessarily inherently wrong. It's not that one is more correct or more wrong or something. And you started approaching it from that angle. You're saying, okay, I realize that you realize that Ben needed to process this. It started coming from it was coming from a place of care for you. So there's less judgment because that you knew that he was actually going to follow through and approach the conversation at that point. There was less need for pressure. There's more assurance, and you were able to collaborate with him more. Now, the other side to this, the avoider side of this, because I see, I'm going to guess that a lot of our clients, the people who are really trying to fix their marriage, are actually probably mostly the pursuers in the relationship.
Typically, yeah.
The tendency. There might be some things. I certainly have many clients who have difficulty bringing up certain topics and having these difficult conversations. But I'm going to say by and large, they're going to be the ones that are taking action and trying to pursue the problem and trying to have the conversations. But so it's great that to have your perspective and say, okay, how has Heather actually approached this in a healthy way? I'll tell you from my end, where I tended to avoid these conversations. I'll say that my wife Jen has done an amazing job in helping us to avoid this sort of pattern. Certainly, there are conversations that I would rather just kind of put aside. I recognize, though, that they have to happen. And what happens with my wife is almost always she approaches these conversations with a lot of understanding and empathy, where she is actually trying to collaborate with me. And I'll say that makes it so much easier for me to sit with that discomfort. And the end result is that we have very open, very productive conversations. So as the avoider, it tends to be their job. Now I'm seeing like all these reasons, all these comments from going and saying, my husband, my wife isn't having these conversations. It's really important to, one, identify reasons for avoidance and address those. Now, Heather, you mentioned with Ben, he was trying to say, he wanted to avoid saying the wrong thing. and to upset you further. But that might not be the reason for many of these other couples.
Oh yeah, and that's not the reason all the time. Sometimes it's just too painful, and sometimes he feels hopeless. Sometimes he's like, no matter what I say, you're gonna blame me for something. I'm tired of being attacked. So why even try? I mean, there's definitely like a gamut there. When we're in a healthy place, though, I realize that's where he's really coming from more often than not. But there's been times where he's just like, this is pointless. I don't have any hope in my brain that we're going to resolve this, so I'm not even going to try. And so that would be when he would never want to talk about it. And I know a lot of you are in that kind of place. So how do you overcome that, right?
Well, and exactly though, you're talking about many different reasons for avoidance. And this is a really helpful thing for those pursuers out there, is to focus on the avoidance instead of the topic at hand. So if Ben, for instance, saying, hey, there's no hope, we can't talk about this, you're not going to listen to me, well, you actually need to focus on that concern first, and not, if you're having these big marriage issues, not the affair or the reason, the fact that they're not going to go to counseling with you, or that they're not talking with you. Why are they avoiding these conversations? That needs to be handled. I know for myself, I have a heart. I really don't want to upset my wife. I don't like seeing her sad. I don't like seeing her angry. And so, like, when I see those kind of things, I have a hard time with that, and I shut down a little bit. And so, we've had to sometimes sit in these conversations and be like, you know what? It's okay for Jen to be sad or angry, and it's okay for me to sit with that, and it's okay for us to talk about that. And then we're able to talk about that feeling a little bit, and we're able then to have the conversation. But I'm just saying, for me, that's oftentimes what it is I don't like that kind of emotion. It might not be that for everyone. Maybe they're avoiding these conversations because they don't feel like they can be heard. Maybe they don't want, they don't like hearing the judgment that might be coming, they feel is coming towards them. It might be something else. But if you can put a little bit less pressure on that and actually address the avoidance, it becomes so much easier. The avoider's role then, if they want to get out of this pattern, is to provide assurance and provide that empathy for their partner's needs. I mean, this is essentially what you were describing, Heather, that entire time, is you just needed to know that Ben was going to have that conversation and he was going to fix things with you. And then that's all you needed.
Right. Exactly. So if you're the avoider, give your partner some assurance that you will talk about this, maybe not right in that moment, but in the next 24 to 48 hours, set a time when you can talk about it, where you're both going to be calm, no distractions, and work to get yourself in the most, non-judgmental, try not to be in the defense mode as possible. So now, what do you do? Because I see tons of comments here about, which is awesome, but they won't work with me. How do you get them to listen, understand? I was the one that cheated on him. They cheated on me. Let's see. How do you get to this place when he refuses to work on anything? I want to become a safe place for him so he can open up. So what if you are the pursuer, but your spouse is like, I'm not going to give you a time we can talk about this in the next 24 or 48 hours because I don't want to, right? I can say that I do that now with Ben because we're in a healthy place. But when we weren't in a healthy place, that was not something that I could encourage him to do. So how do we even kind of bridge that gap?
So, I mean, that is like the very extreme of this sort of dynamic.
Yeah.
Where this person is so shut off, so shut down that they're just outright refusing these conversations. And this is hard to really assess what needs to happen without talking to this individual person. The first things that I would be looking at, if this was my client, I'd be examining, okay, how is this person approaching these kind of conversations? are usually what I look at first in order to assess that is, how is this person feeling? Like, what is their emotional state surrounding this topic? Much like we were discussing, like what happens with typically with this pursuer is there is that sense of anxiety and stress. I need to fix this. And there tends to, if it's in an unhealthy place, it comes across as that blame and criticism, that judgment. And so these are the things that I would be looking for and saying, okay, is there something in the client's control that they can affect? That can they adjust their approach? If that's all in a great place, and this is a very calm person, and they are speaking very rationally and are very supportive of their spouse, and they're still shutting down, then I am then second looking at, okay, why would this be such a difficult conversation for the avoider? What is it that they are hoping to avoid from this? And really looking at that, focusing in on that. Much like we were talking about, you can't keep that pressure on the topic. You have to shift your focus to the avoidance itself. So like I'm even, as I'm scrolling through comments, I'm even seeing some of these reasons. My husband hates contention, or like there's discussions of mistakes that have been made, and all these things. That should be the focus. Like for the husband who hates contention, you really need, if you're going to pursue these problems, you're going to need to focus on soothing that fear. Mm-hmm. Okay, this isn't contentious. I'm actually a calm person right now. I actually want to work with this so that we can make this a little bit calm, and we don't have to be contentious because I care about you. You hear, like, I'm just kind of hypothetically having this conversation with my invisible spouse right here, but that sort of assurance is also needed, much like the assurance is needed for the pursuer's anxieties and fears.
Yeah. So this is a really great comment from someone who says, I think I am the avoider here. My husband just told me yesterday he keeps chasing me. I feel talking doesn't really make any difference, as he just blames and accuses me and ends up not listening to me. So if you were the pursuer here.
So I think we lost Heather there.
I'm just saying,
Heather, we lost you again for a few seconds.
Okay. So if you're the pursuer here,
okay,
and your wife is saying this, how would you address their avoidance of wanting to talk about it? If they're saying, you just blame me, you accuse me, talking doesn't make a difference, you don't listen to me, so why do I want to talk to you?
And I think it's the same solution here. As the avoider, you need to identify, why am I avoiding this conversation? And this comment has already done that. They're saying, I don't like the blame, the criticism, on all that. If you come at it and say, hey, look, I really want to solve this problem with you, but this is making it really hard for me. If you're coming at this and blaming me and criticizing me, that's not going to work. Like, do you hear my tone on this? This is kind of a key component with either side. It's not an emotional tone. It's not like I'm being swept up with getting upset and angry, or getting swept up with that feeling of anxiety and shutting down. It's really important that you are in a calm place, that you can be calm and confident with your position. So if you're saying, I absolutely feel like I can address this, I just need for there to be less blame and criticism, and I can control this because I can give him feedback when he speaks to me that way. Like, if you are confident in that sort of, like, I can handle this, you're going to be able to have that conversation so much easier, and you're going to be able to address the reasons for that avoidance. So it may need some work on your part to be able to get to that calm, confident place. And I'm just going to say from the perspective of the avoider, you might need to be able to be okay with sitting with some of that discomfort to be able to give that feedback.
Yes. And as a pursuer might say something like this, like if, pursuer here, I hear that, you don't like it. When we're talking, you feel like it doesn't make a difference, that, you feel like I'm blaming you for a lot of things. I'm accusing you. You feel like I'm not really listening. And so I want to help you feel heard. I want to help you feel understood. And I want to listen to only understand you right now. When is it time, do you think, we could talk about it in that way?
I would actually like what you said right there, because sometimes you actually might need to provide the words that your spouse needs to say to you. I don't know if you ever do this, Heather. My wife Jen and I sometimes have to do this and be like, I just need you. Like, sometimes I have to go to her and I say, for us to have this conversation, I just need you to say, Mark, I understand, and I'm sorry for this. All I need is for you to say those words, and I can be present here, and I would be okay. Sometimes you need to do that, and because your spouse might not be aware of what they're doing or how they're saying it, and they might need just a little bit of some support there. What to say.
And what we're doing is we're again setting the stage. So understand, first of all, maybe what role you're in and what role your spouse might be in, and then understand why they might be feeling that way. Why is he pursuing you? Why does he feel like he's chasing after you? Or why do you feel like he's avoiding you or she's avoiding you? And listen to what they're saying. If it's, you never listen to me, you always blame me, you always get aggressive, it's always contentious, right? Listen to those cues and then set some expectations of, we want to have this conversation where you feel understood. I want to respect you and I want you to respect me. I want us to talk with calm voices, even that much, as soon as our voices start to raise, we're just going to hit pause and we'll come back to it later, right? It's okay to do that. I know the pursuer, we're often in a lot of tension and fear, and we want it done now. We want it done yesterday, right? And we're so eager to try to resolve things quickly that then we push too hard, which we know when we push our spouse only pushes them further away. And so setting that stage, having the right expectations really can help you to handle these really hard conversations in a calm, effective, and understanding manner.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, we could certainly go off of more comments here. Do we need to, what do you think, Heather? Have we beat the dead horse quite yet, or?
I hope so. Maybe let's go into one or two maybe case studies or examples of some really hard conversations. Usually we're talking about, like, let's just bring up the affair, right? So maybe you're wondering if your spouse really is having an affair, or maybe you found out that they are having an affair. Mark, how would you help a client set the stage to have that kind of conversation with their spouse so that it doesn't backfire?
Well, that's going to be a conversation where one would expect, like, if you're the one needing to confront the affair, that's what I'm assuming.
Yeah.
One would expect there to be a lot of judgment and anger and just all sorts of guilt and shame surrounding something like this. And if you're going to set the stage for that kind of conversation, and you want them to actually be open about it, then you need to remove a lot of the fear of those emotions. Now, of course, I've never had an affair, but I can imagine if that was a conversation that my wife had to bring to me, and she was able to come at it and say, hey, look, I need to talk to you about this sort of thing, and this is difficult, but you know what, I want to make sure that you're not feeling judged, and I want to let you know I'm not angry, I just want to know what's going on. And that sort of approach, even still, I can feel like that wouldn't be a conversation that I would want to have. There would have to be a high amount of assurance to be able to be open with something so sensitive as something like that. Now, of course, you can go way far in the other direction, providing so much assurance that you're not really addressing. the problem. You're not able to express how you feel. If you're saying, hey, look, I'm not going to be angry, I'm not going to be upset, I'm not going to be judging, you end up removing some of your voice in that circumstance if you just really lay that on thick. But I think there's a healthy balance that can be had there, where you can discuss, and this is sometimes where Jen and I have had to come to, where we can discuss our feelings without being swept up in the feelings. Where we can say, hey, it's okay that I'm angry, but I'm not going to be angry in this moment. This is an upsetting thing, but I'm not approaching you with anger. And that's at least the balance that Jen and I have had to have on difficult conversations. Sometimes that has become healthy for us. So yeah.
Right. One thing that has been absolutely transformative for me, and I know many of you and many of our clients, is learning emotional processing. Because when we are so deeply hurt, we are so deeply wounded, when we are terrified, when we are so angry, and all the gamut of those emotions, and we're in that state, we know what happens. We've talked about it so many times here, but if you don't know, you go into the limbic system, which activates the fight, flight, or freeze response and cuts off blood flow to the reasoning part of our brain, okay? Diverts all the resources to the animalistic part of ourselves, and we react from that kind of a state, and which is not our highest selves, and it only tends to make things worse. Would you guys agree? Right? It only tends to make things a lot worse. But those emotions are instinctual, and there's something that we don't want to suppress or judge ourselves about or blame. And I encourage you guys to listen to the whole podcast we did, 2 or 3 ago on No Emotions Bad. I can't remember the title of it, but I know we talked about that a while. But anyway, go through that. But it's really crucial that we learn that when we have these really heightened, strong, powerful emotions, that they can move through us. Emotion is in motion, is the Latin root. It's in motion. And so how do you process through that? Because you are going to be hurt. You are going to be scared. You are going to be angry. But if you just react out of that kind of state, it's not usually going to be the most effective and healthy for your relationship. So learning some emotional processing techniques and then saying, I can talk about this now that this hurts me. I'm deeply, deeply hurt here, without being in that state of absolute despair in that moment. So I hope that kind of makes sense from a high level perspective here, but we can learn how to process through our emotions so that we can get to a calm, centered place and then be able to go to our spouse and say, this hurts me, without reacting from that animalistic state, acting from the higher part of ourselves with the reasoning part of our brains and acting, in accordance with that.
So I want to apply what you're saying to one of the comments. One of the comments says, they say, so listening and keeping mouth shut, trying to understand where he's coming from. And what you said, I think, specifically addresses that. And it's not simply about, and what I said earlier as well, it's not simply about keeping your mouth shut.
Right.
And just listening. It's going to be so much better. And this is what I tell all of my clients. If you are in a healthy place, if you can be calm and confident, you provide so much more ability to have these crucial conversations that need to happen. And quite often they're avoided and not happening because everyone is so emotional approaching them. So you can control your part of that. That's all we're saying here.
Right. And it's not like saying that you don't feel those things or saying what they're doing is right or that you shouldn't have emotions, but it's just saying that when we're in the height of that emotion, that's not the right time to be having really hard conversations, right? It's better to process through those things, get to a calm, centered place, and then say, this hurt me. And you can say that with sincerity and authenticity, true to what you're really going through, and honoring to yourself without it being really damaging to the relationship because you're not in the height of it, if that makes sense. All right, cool. Well, this has been awesome. I hope that this has been helpful for you guys. Make sure that you really pay attention to what resonates to you and what you feel like is needed in your marriage. Go back and listen to this again if you need to. I know some of you here on Facebook are talking about how do I get him to work on the marriage, make it last? How do I get them to do it? There's an ongoing affair. There are so many podcasts that we've gone deeper into those topics specifically. And we always encourage you to join one of our master classes where we teach the entire path process, which shows you how to save your marriage even if your spouse is completely checked out, how to stop the divorce process, how to end an affair for good, and the whole spectrum there. All right, so now we're going into our marriage mythbuster. And it's funny because we're on a bit of a theme here. We talked about something similar, but this is in a little bit of a different twist than what we did last week or the week before. The marriage mythbuster today is good, healthy marriages come naturally. Do they come naturally, Marc?
They don't.
You're born to have a great marriage and it's just happily ever after?
No. So one of my favorite pieces of advice for marriage comes from, it's John Gottman. He's never, if you get into marriage literature, books, whatever, you've probably heard of Gottman, who tells us that the most important skill a couple can learn is to repair. And what this tells me is that problems are going to arise and they will require work. It's an inevitable thing in a long-term relationship. I've often found that if people say, oh, we never have arguments, we always get along, that tends to be this alarm that goes off in my head saying, no, something is going on here. It usually means that someone is not speaking up and someone is not feeling heard. Someone's voice isn't mattering as much and they're just giving in. So basically, yeah, it does require work. Now this myth, where it comes from, and it's very easy to see where it comes from, because very early in early stages of relationships, most relationships don't feel like work, and they appear to just happen naturally. I can remember when my wife and I were first dating, and everything just seemed so easy. It just was naturally good. We wanted to be around each other. It didn't. Now, this is kind of like this odd sort of veil that kind of sits over your memories, because even in the moment, it's kind of this misperception that it's not work to make the relationship work. The funny thing is that most of the time they don't feel like work because both individuals are putting so much into the relationship and putting in a lot of effort. I look back at that time, I'm like, oh, it's this nice rosy sort of time, but then I also look back and I'm like, man, I put a lot of time and effort into dating my wife. Beginning of the marriage, a lot of time and effort. Now, of course, right now I still put in a lot of time and effort. It's just that sometimes I recognize, okay, I do need to put in a little bit more effort here or there, and it's fine, because then it makes it feel easy, because then my wife is doing the same. But basically, what I'm getting at, the myth comes about because we don't recognize all the effort that we have had to put into it. And quite often it starts to feel like work because we become accustomed over time to many of the everyday actions that each of the spouses puts into the relationship. I mean, if you really think about it, how much time and effort are each of you putting into the relationship? You might say, well, not a lot, but if you think about it, like, you're probably going to work for 8 hours a day. You're probably making meals for each other. There's probably care for kids for each other. It's just not directed 100% at your partner. But we become accustomed to these sort of actions, and we start to downplay a lot of that effort. And part of it is, we're actually wanting more of that time and attention and focus from our partner, but also at the same time not really feeling like we ourselves have a lot of that time to provide for our partner either. The solution comes in I think, to this sort of problem, like where we're saying, okay, the marriage has become work, is to actually, have a more of a habit of focusing in specifically on each other, and to find things that you do appreciate about your partner, finding things that you do enjoy about your partner, doing with your partner. And when you get that into more of a habit, it becomes a lot easier. This might mean that you cut out some of those other responsibilities and time sinks. I know a lot of couples who would say, okay, well, the kids come first, 100%. Well, then the focus tends to go elsewhere, and the relationship starts to feel more like work. But if you can cut out some of your other responsibilities as much as you can, and put a little bit more focus towards the marriage, it naturally becomes, or feels more natural, and it feels less like work. Anyways, that's kind of the myth, all the information surrounding that myth. I'm sorry, you were cutting out there for a second. What were you saying, Heather?
Oh, go ahead, finish your thought. You're good.
Oh no, that's all. I finished my thought.
Okay, awesome. So I like what you said with Dr. John Gottman there, that the most important skill a couple can learn is repair. And there is this myth that says it's just supposed to be natural. It's just supposed to work out. We're supposed to be soulmates. We're supposed to be compatible. How many of us have heard it? Like, we're just not compatible anymore, right? Or we just need to be compatible. If we were more compatible, then we could make this work. So think about it.
Excuse.
In our culture, where do we focus our love stories on, our movies on, the books on, and the all of the focus, even if you think about dollars spent in a marriage on the wedding, right? How many dollars are spent after the wedding on learning how to repair a relationship, right? It shows that we have it a little bit backwards in our culture. Not all cultures are this way. There are some cultures that celebrate the 80-year-old couple and the life journey that they've been on, and they model that example to start with, okay? But in our culture, we focus on the love. We focus on cloud nine. We focus on head over heels and the infatuation stage, right? And we think that that's supposed to last the entirety of the marriage. And the reality is the infatuation stage is a beautiful stage, but it's just one of the stages of marriage. And we become really unhappy and unfulfilled and unsatisfied if we have the perception that that stage should just naturally keep us together the entire time. It's part of it, and you can have infatuation at all stages of your marriage. It doesn't only have to be at the beginning, but it in of itself is not deep and strong enough to last the storms and the challenges of life. The deeper stages come when we get to contractual stage, and then ultimately unconditional love. So let's be really careful about how much we buy into the whole, butterflies, falling in love, infatuation stage. And let's put more emphasis on the deeper, lasting love that comes from commitment long-term. And that does require work. It's fascinating, though, Marc, you said, as you build these habits and you build these routines. I don't know about you, Marc, but I get people a lot. Like we just went on a date, 2 weeks ago on our date. We had a couple come up to us and be like, "You are just so in love. Did you just get married?" And we're like, "No, we've been married 15 years and we have 8 kids together." Yes, 8 kids together. And they were just like, "I thought you were newlyweds," the way you're just like goo eyes at each other across the table. And we get this kind of feedback.
We've had those comments we've had those comments quite often as well. It's because we love each other, and it shows because we put in work.
Yeah, we are goofy and silly. We went to the Broadmoor for our anniversary, and we found an empty ballroom because of COVID. All their event rooms are closed, and with no music, we just started dancing in the middle of the ballroom. Like, we're goofy, like silly kid in love kind of people. But it's because we have a strong foundation beneath all of that have helped us to weather those really challenging storms of life. And so it can feel effortless the more work you put in. Weird, huh? But it's kind of like strength training. I'm getting into strength training right now, and it's really grueling and it's really hard and I really hate it. But I know that if I stick with it, that my body is going to become stronger. The exercises are going to become easier. It will become more effortless because I've grown into a better, stronger person. And so the work that might feel really grueling, really hard, really challenging right now, that might be bringing you to your knees, is going to be what helps shape you into the couple that you can be, so that you can have a relationship that feels absolutely blissful. So that being said, if you feel like you want more help with this, as always, please reach out to us here on Facebook. If you have not yet joined our Thriving Marriage Facebook group, we got our people live. We love you guys. Encourage you guys to do that. We are the fastest growing online marriage resource, which is awesome because results don't lie. And we're here to help you get those results. If you're wanting a free marriage breakthrough call specifically to learn more about coaching, then go to highthrivecoaching.com/apply. Awesome. So next week, Marc and I, we're going to share with you how to find, okay, I totally did not type that right. Next week, rewind, and we never edit these, so you always get it really real. Next week, we're going to share with you how to find out common mistakes in speaking with your spouse. That isn't very well worded either, but we're going to talk about mistakes.
You get the idea.
Maybe we'll talk about some mistakes that I'm making right now and trying to communicate about communication. Anyway, if you're making some of these common mistakes in communication, you definitely want to tune into that. So thank you, Marc. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll talk again soon.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.